when I coach 7 and 8 figure leaders, it's not a disparate place to come from.
No.
Because even a 1 to 5 person employee business, that founder is thinking about the 3 million things in their head that they need to get done, just like someone who's running a $50 million a year business. It's not that different. There's no magic productivity hacks. And the through line was always energy. That's what I uncovered. I was a leader. I managed teams of 20 people. I always had the perspective of let's elevate upward together. Protecting that founder energy is protecting enterprise value from my perspective. And that's why this Energy OS isn't fluff. I really view it as growth insurance. Mm-hmm. A founder who figures out how to keep that energy going as they scale up in the world, that leads to sharper decisions, leads better teams. And again, I love to go back to creating ripples well beyond just their face value or their own success. Every 3 months, I go and do an evaluation of things that I'm going to stop doing or say no to that aren't moving progress forward. So that's critical for me to do. I need to continue to do that, and it's all about just having fun. It's still feeling satisfied, feeling energized.
You just heard a taste of the conversation with Adam W.Barney, moments that show the challenges and breakthroughs solopreneurs face along the way. In this episode, we'll dig deeper into how protecting your energy isn't just personal wellness, it's growth insurance. We'll also look at how solopreneurs can refine their positioning, design a dream week that actually works, and use small wins as momentum to keep moving forward. This is Unfiltered Solopreneur. I'm Nikhil. Let's dive in. Hello and welcome to a new episode of Unfiltered Solopreneur. I'm your host, Nikhil Vaish, founder and CEO of Boost Solo. My next guest got laid off twice, wrote his resignation letter mid-flight from Mexico, and now coaches 7 and 8 figure founders, showing that sometimes fed up is the best place to start. Adam, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Nikhil. Let's do this.
All right, I'm excited. Now, as I mentioned a minute ago, you've been through 2 corporate layoffs, which obviously are gut punches for anyone. Then there was that plane ride back from Mexico where you wrote your resignation letter, right? So can you take us back into your head in that moment? What were you feeling? Fear, freedom, or something else entirely?
So, I have to say, it was not so much fear, maybe as it was the pent-up nature of 20 plus years in a nonlinear corporate marketing career, right? I started there. I'd been at Microsoft, I'd been at Akamai Technologies, I'd been at Digitas. And on paper, I was winning, of course, big budgets, big titles, big clients. I also did spend some time in the venture capital backed startup world as well, not just those big places, but between the curtain there, what I call energy debt was piling up. I remember, say, 2008 at Digitas like it was yesterday. We were going, of course, through the financial crisis then. There was a actually long history of raise freezes that happened. And every quarter, the message basically kind of felt like, honestly, we were in a great place, but you should be grateful you even have a job. And that was kind of my first wake-up call that loyalty is really just a one-way street. Fast forward then to Akamai a number of years later, I was watching cycles of course, equity investors come in, which lead to promotions, but also layoffs that happen on a regular basis. And that really happened, honestly, not necessarily based on performance, but more almost on insider networks. And that was kind of the second wake up, I would say, that the game is rigged if you don't build a level of autonomy, into it. And then, of course, life has hit harder in other places. I lost my mom to ALS coming up on 11 years ago, and watching that fight, stripped it kind of all back in the midst of that 20-year corporate career. And I think eventually what came to mind was the question wasn't what's my next promotion? It was what really fuels us to keep going. And, I found that the answer staring at me was a combination of energy, resilience, and optimism, along with that autonomy. And that's when the cracks became a pivot.
Yeah, you've given me mild PTSD, reminding me of all the things that you had to deal with in the corporate world. But and on a more serious note, though, you're right, though, because it's like you spend so much time in the corporate world thinking of what next, the next title, the next promotion, the next sort of area of responsibility, the pay packet, the bonus, and then at some point, I think we say why, right?
Right.
Things happen, and I think that is sort of a light switch moment for a lot of people,
Yep.
which you just described a minute ago. So now I've talked about light switch. Now obviously I have to go to the darkness. Now in your book you describe the allure of darkness, right?
Right.
That seductive pull when things collapse, I think, is the way you talked about it. So
Right.
what did that darkness actually feel like for you day to day as on your own as a solopreneur? And was there a moment when you flipped the switch and sort of found your way out?
So, as a solopreneur specifically, I have to say that it was not necessarily something that hit me instantly over
Yeah.
that period of time. It wasn't clean, right? I left corporate. It's a bold move, but through that, the darkness has really been I've tried coaching offers that have flopped. I built programs that no one bought. I actually go back to it's been about a 4-year journey since I left that corporate career. I spent the first year, and this is probably something hard for a lot of entrepreneurs to stomach if they're thinking about making this move. I honestly spent that first year sort of going, I don't know where I want to go or what I want to do. I had known from through one of the previous layoffs, I had built a boutique marketing agency. That was the way that I pulled my bootstraps up and moved forward. But I knew that wasn't exactly where I wanted to go. I actually felt through my corporate career, I describe it as very nonlinear because I started in paid search at an agency in the infancy of digital marketing that
Yeah.
had built a proprietary data analytics engine. That then led into that big agency world and working with those clients through tough times. That was an interesting situation because we actually, in my first couple of years in that world, we lost a gigantic client, and miraculously, they didn't lay anyone on the team off. So you had a group of almost 40 people who literally were twiddling their thumbs at their desks, waiting for the next big client to come in and saying, this is wild, right? So that's the flip side to that 2008 financial crisis and the raise freezes, where you're just like, oh goodness, I've got this infrastructure and I don't have to really worry, but so many other people have to worry in this kind of a situation. But that said, that prepared me to those low points, or for those low points rather. And I really realized innately through this process, both, personally through the layoffs, through losing my mom, but then also now in the challenges of the last 4 years of building a coaching practice, you know, every failed iteration always, in my mind, leaves to breadcrumbs. It leaves breadcrumbs behind. And eventually, I realized the through line wasn't about tactics. It wasn't about funnels. I like to actually say in my coaching practice, a lot of people talk about silver bullets. If you actually dig into it, a silver bullet was never produced in this world. It's not a real thing. So there are no silver bullets. There's no magic productivity hacks. And the through line was always energy. That's what I uncovered. It was about, seeing how leaders that I'd experienced across my corporate career, I was a leader, I managed teams of 20 people. I always had the perspective of let's elevate upward together. I saw other leaders who didn't share that perspective, which is a shortcoming in the world. But leaders from either side of that fence didn't fail because they didn't know what to do. I think they really failed because they didn't have the fuel to do it. And that was the realization that helped shape everything that I've done now from a coaching practice. I think Nikhil, my first book came out last year. It's a book called Make Your Own Glass Half Full, The Empowered Path to Optimism and Autonomy. I've built that. I love being, of course, in this entrepreneurial world on podcasts and joining you here today. I've got my own podcast that's called Is Anything Real in Paid Advertising? I've just mentioned these because each of these things aren't what typically gets laid out on the pathway, but they're a deep self-led amount of self-determination and self-belief that allow me to march forward to what really drives me at the center of myself. And that realization that I could do that, part of it is it's shedding that imposter syndrome is one part of the equation. And I have to say, imposter syndrome, growth mindset thinking is probably overused in a corporate sense or an entrepreneurial sense these days.
Yeah.
But you have to shed a little bit of that, look inward. And that's actually what I like to unlock with my coaching clients through my practice as well.
Yeah, no, well said. And I'm glad you talked about the fact that there are no light switches, there are no growth hacks, right? Because it is really one foot in front of the other. And I think that, and there's some interesting things you said there, which is one is when you work so many years in the corporate world, you accumulate a lot of different skills, right? Like I didn't have a linear journey either. So I think one of the hard things for people going out on their own is trying to figure out how to sharpen the tip of the spear. Because if you go with like your entire package or your toolkit, it just confuses the hell out of people, right?
Exactly.
Because they don't know what you do, even if you do a lot of different things. Whereas if you focus on one thing, you can bring the rest of the toolkit once you earn the trust with that one thing.
Right.
And that's something I always talk to solopreneurs about. And I think the other thing that's interesting is also the resilience. And we'll talk about that more. I want to come back later in the podcast to talk about some of the things you talk about in your book and how we can, give tips to solopreneurs.
Cool.
But I think, just that notion of you need to let the market will tell you what it's looking for and sort of where, but you can't do that without trying things and failing. And like you said, picking up the breadcrumbs, right?
Failing is okay. I mean, it's also important, I think, to understand, everyone who's entering this journey has different sets of what I actually will say I call trauma, right? Mm-hmm. Our trauma informs the way we operate in difficult situations.
Yeah.
And actually something I truly believe, and I talk about a lot lately, is the fact that my trauma that I've experienced feels up to the top of here to me. Your trauma on your side, Nikhil, it also feels up to the top of here, but from an outward perspective, if someone was evaluating us, your trauma could be on a different scale than mine. But the important piece of it, inside, whatever we faced in terms of challenges, feels gigantic to us, and it affects us. It's the ripple that we've felt. And then it's important as leaders, I view, to understand that the ripples of how you operate are always critical, and that's how you lead and guide. And if you work on the internal self before you even start to become a leader, that opens up the doorways for understanding and leading from a higher place of enablement rather than the micromanaging, pushing down, lack of transparency space that 50% of leaders out there walk in with. And it's unfortunate.
Yeah. And unfortunately, they never sort of teach them those skills, right? And I'm glad people are sort of more open now to coaching in the corporate world. Because I mean, one of the analogies we always talk about is like, people like Tiger Woods don't just have a swing coach, they have a mindset coach. So it's like, why, and people operating it, leadership roles, especially very high up, it's very lonely up there, right? So I think it's
exactly
good. So
and Nikhil, I've told my clients over time also, I've started to realize that energy debt always comes due, right? It's outside of those things that maybe lead us to understanding that we are successful. That energy debt comes around whether we know it or not, and I learned it literally based on my own staircase. I a few months ago, I strained a leg running up the stairs in my house because I was sprinting on fumes. And that injury became another metaphor to lean into. If you don't design your energy, your body, your mind, and your business, rather, if you don't design your energy, your body, your mind, and your business will eventually collect the bill. And that's why I've gone and built a Scale Smarter Energy OS, which is a 90-day installation for leaders who are trying to scale fast.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense to me. And you're right. The energy is the most important fuel for a solo business owner or for an entrepreneur, right? So you run out of that, everything else falls apart. So now you help agencies scale to millions, but let's flip the lens for a second. What was the first dollar amount you earned as a coach which made you think, okay, holy crap, this might actually work? And how long did it take you to get there?
So it took a while to get there,
Yeah.
actually. I spent that first year after leaving the corporate environment digging into my own superpower. And I really feel everyone in this world does have a superpower. My superpower is networking, but it's more than just networking. It's about building collisions within that network from a particle science level, fusing together different pieces of the puzzle, and that elevates communities together. But I stumbled across it, digs into the autonomy that I talk about in the book.
Yeah.
I have always felt this self determined need to do these different things, and it drives me from a learning level and an openness to evolution. That's what opens those doors in my mind. So it's really fascinating. I was my last two corporate jobs. I was laid off from Akamai. It was a year into COVID. The timing was really funny. My wife actually, incidentally, had quit her full-time job in education about 6 weeks before. She's now in a fantastic place where she's built an education policy, uh, uh, independent, practice. But I never would have, I had I been laid off before she did that, would she have quit that job? Probably not. So
Yeah.
there's other pieces of the impact here. We're when you start to have young kids or be part of the sandwich generation, it can change the trajectory of things, but it's just timing. Funny enough, though, I was laid off from Akamai. My wife's business was burgeoning and growing. I started a business accelerator program. I'm sure many of our listeners here know Morning Brew from a daily email newsletter publication
Yeah.
started by, out of the University of Michigan by the incredible Austin Reef and Alex Lieberman. I was actually part of the first cohort of a business accelerator program that they put together in early 2021. That was incredible. The learning at Morning Brew Arm doesn't exist anymore, but there are 4,000 global alumni who went through their programs. And that led me to start to really understand where my unique proposition was in the mix of all of the experience I had that I could pull up and bring into coaching. Um, Ultimately, the first handful of clients, as I was dabbling through this, I really appreciate them because I learned a lot, not just from landing them as clients,
Yeah.
but I learned a lot from why they walked away and stopped working with me. That was incredibly powerful. But I think when I first launched my coaching practice, if I'm remembering correctly, I was charging $450 a month
Wow.
for my coaching, way significantly undervaluing the
Yeah.
experience I have in the background, everything that I built from a coaching perspective. I didn't have a lot to build from at that point, but I realized it took me a couple of years to say that's the wrong way to charge my clients, and
Yeah.
I love to, because I come from a marketing background, I'm built on communication, I'm built on transparency. I think a lot of coaches out in the world do their coaching, then they walk away until the next call. I love that asynchronous accountability support that really comes with being the battery pack, the cheerleader to drive that transformational change in the back pocket.
Yeah.
That's not anything that feels natural for me to do. So that's a differentiator in my practice. But that first set of $450 a month clients were hugely valuable to say, hey, I actually can do this. But then I refer back to this fantastic chart that comes from Gartner. In the last couple of years of my corporate career, we used a lot of the Gartner research out there to help architect success for products, especially within the Akamai universe.
Yeah.
There's the Gartner hype curve. There's this incredible chart that shows the emotional cost of a startup founder. And I felt that throughout the journey. I didn't know where I was starting at first. I had a loose idea. I figured out the idea. I hit go, dabble, dabble, dabble. And now I'm finally at a pivotal turning point where I've done enough work. I've laid the groundwork and I can amplify what I charge. And that's a hard thing, as any entrepreneur who's starting has to have a board of advisors, number one, around them to help guide them.
Yeah.
I've been part of a couple fractional consultant communities, and there's actually incredible support within those because of the same intentionality, but also a lot of the conversation stems, what do I charge for, what are my rates? How do
Yeah.
I charge the rates that are valuable? And one of the biggest learnings I had early actually in the networking journey was reconnecting with someone I had worked at years ago who was in a junior ad ops position at Digitas, who had then gone on to work at HubSpot, leading their, go to market practice, had built a big career in the B2B side of things and had a B2B consultancy. And he gave me one piece of advice early on: don't hesitate to ask what other people are charging.
Yeah.
Even if the worst answer you're going to get is, I don't feel comfortable sharing that, and that's okay. You can still use that to inform how you charge, and then you can ask for the feedback. Am I undercharging? There's actually been an evolution though in the last couple of years that are deeply valuable. But having that confidence to just ask questions and be okay with getting no is one of the biggest learnings through any entrepreneurial journey that I've seen, right? And asking anyone what they're charging for their services is so critically important. Then that's turned in the last 6 months into having some really fascinating conversations with different folks at a higher level, and they say that's what led me to move my pricing. They're going, 6 months ago I was still charging $750 a month for my coaching, way undervaluing my experience and background. And I realized I need to up level significantly, but I need to package things differently.
Right.
And take the learnings of the last 3.5 years and put them in a box and identify, ultimately nothing in this world is brand new, but it's figuring out what the less crowded route to attack might be. And I had a lightning bolt that went off just about 6 weeks ago that said, I've worked everywhere from venture capital backed companies to global scale companies. That aligns fantastic from a perspective of this energy operating system with leaders in the 7-8 figure range, general partners or venture capital partners who have a portfolio of founders within their network. Those are the kind of leaders who need some of the guidance that I can provide, because I can take the forest for the trees. I still do love two tools early in the process, one being Ikigai, the Japanese concept for
I know
reason
that.
for being. The second being an Odyssey plan that looks 5 to 10 years in the future and then lays out 3 different paths. Those tools are still important, even for a founder who's going from completely bootstrapping to seed investment to Series A. You see so much in the founder world where founders flame out by Series B investment.
Yeah.
How do you protect that? How do you take, the physical rhythm, designing weeks where rest fuels performance? How do you take mental clarity, which is cutting through the noise so that your focus hits the right targets? And then emotional connection, surrounding yourself with multipliers, not drainers, while you're also a multiplier. That's where I love to play. I love to take that background I've built across my corporate career and say, hey, if you're at this level, I can tell you the steps, the building blocks to get to this level. And
Yeah.
that's the sweet spot to be in the middle of.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I appreciate you sharing that, because I think it was a lot of valuable advice for people who struggle with undercharging themselves. And honestly, I think when you're starting out, we all do that, because to me, pricing is linked to confidence, and confidence is linked to closing to happy clients, right? And proving to yourself that you're providing value. And I think it's a little bit of a step ladder that we all have to go through. So I totally agree.
The other thing that's really interesting here, and I think it's an unfiltered truth, even for the solopreneurs, not even just the founders out there in the world that I love to help, but each of us can be leaders, that look like we're killing it from the outside. It appears outwardly that revenues are climbing, teams are growing, you're getting big speaking gigs, but behind closed doors, we can end up exhausted, second guessing, and juggling fires, right?
Yeah.
So, I really think, especially for investors or GPs listening, this really matters because companies and, founders as well, but companies don't collapse just based on strategy.
Mm-hmm.
They collapse when the founder or the leadership team runs out of fuel.
Yeah.
And protecting that founder energy is protecting enterprise value from my perspective. And that's why this energy OS isn't fluff. I really view it as growth insurance.
Mm-hmm.
A founder who figures out how to keep that energy going as they scale up in the world, that leads to sharper decisions, leads better teams. And again, I love to go back to creating ripples well beyond just their face value or their own success. That's how everyone elevates. All the ships rise with the ocean.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I want to come back and touch on the energy piece from a brand perspective. So I want to move the conversation a little bit to brand and marketing. So
cool.
Something you told me which is interesting, which is I think in the pre-call you said you help agencies leak. You told me agencies leak profit when their positioning isn't sharp. So where do solopreneurs leak brand value in your view? What are sort of the hidden cracks that silently cost them credibility or clients?
Oh my goodness. You can come from a couple different angles here.
Yeah.
Right? So part of it gets into that self-understanding. Once again, if we don't understand truly what operates at the center of ourselves, we can't authentically go and sell outward, especially as a solopreneur who's building a business over time. Maybe to a fault, to a certain extent, I've fallen into leaning into that a little heavy. But for instance, from a branding perspective, I've realized through my life, you'll see here, I'm Adam W.Barney. That W is so important to my brand identity. It's about differentiating myself from the other Adam Barneys out in the world, but that W sits in the center of what drives me. That stands for Wellington. That's the middle name that goes back 5 generations on my paternal side, but it pairs with the fact that I'm the last male heir to my arm of the Barney lineage. So keeping that front and center in everything that I do is so critically important to my brand. But it's a personal thing that drives me more than just what differentiates in the world. And I'll also say, I'll fully be transparent here. The first 2 years of my practice, I wasn't just undercharging. I had called myself a growth coach. You can probably, Google me still to this day or search for me on any search bar, and you'll still see growth coach out there. And I never felt comfortable with that. It felt close. It didn't feel right there.
Yeah.
And then I actually just incidentally had a conversation with a fellow coach in my network in New York. Her name is Stephanie Simpson. She was talking about changes she was bringing into her practice. And she said to me, and she's an ICF certified coach, she said, Adam, you talk about energy a lot. That's not a light switch. That's a lightning bolt.
Yeah.
Almost a side comment that turns into a lightning bolt. Came back, changed my taxonomy to energy coach. I realized that that's where, number one, from a branding perspective, there is a plug as an emoji, which is an important thing to bring into the branding as well.
Right.
But that energy is truly the differentiator. And something I realized, because I have a lot of, in my network, I have a lot of connections in the climate space as well, in the justice and equity world, which is actually something that I love to dive into. I really love to work with those founders who don't come from where I do as a white male in the world and help them succeed. That's what drives me from an even deeper personal mission perspective. They don't understand what energy coaching means. And that's why, in my branding, depending on the situation, I say, hey, I'm Adam W.Barney. I'm an energy coach. I wish I could say that was about mystical stones and sorcery, because if we could wave a magic wand to solve for things in our life and in the world, that would be fantastic. But that's not the way it works. I'm that personal energy battery pack in your back pocket as you go through transition that can take my expertise from my corporate career, boil it down, and help you apply that to where you are today. It's also deeply important for me to understand the origin story of where someone comes from. That's a side note that I'll bring in there as well.
Yeah.
But it's so critically important to be able to meet people where they are today, but based on where they've come from previously. You know, that's the conversation that comes into play. And it helped me realize that that's what I like to unlock within people. It's funny, though, another thread that comes into my coaching from my corporate career, I worked with so many different clients over the years, and I actually really enjoyed, maybe I'm sadomasochistic to a certain extent, I actually liked the clients that were difficult, that it took 6 months to peel back multiple layers of the onion.
Yeah.
More than those clients where it was just all fine and dandy from day one, because those relationships, because you got to that raw part, or you built that callus or that armor together, that is the deeper relationship. And that's where I love now working with these 7-8 figure founders and founding teams that are going through these challenges, because I'm going to dig in and ask questions, but I'm not going to walk away when there's a challenging situation. We need to face those challenges straight up. I will do that arm in arm with you. I'm not saying I'm going to, get on your board calls necessarily as a voice, but if you need that 5-minute energy boost before you step into that room, shoot me a text. We hop on a call. I give you that energy boost and that perspective that I can bring, and then you can elevate up there.
Yeah, no, that's great. And there's a lot to unpack there. You actually jumped two of my questions in your answer there, which is great, which is good. That's not a bad thing. But I want to pull out 3 things there, right? One is, which is really interesting, I think, for people listening to, is one is you will constantly evolve, right? I love that you talked about the fact you start as a growth coach, because I was going to ask you, like, where did you start? You didn't start as an energy coach. So I think that evolution is really important and goes back to the learning that you were talking about. And in tandem to that, I think what's interesting is one of the ways I work with clients is I help them sort of define their brand, their positioning, sort of how they stand out. But the way I describe it to them is you can't write the label from inside the bottle, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you need somebody to help pull you out. And I love that you talked about the coach who sort of gave you that side comment of energy. And you need that feedback, basically, right? To constantly understand sort of how to refine and what's working, what's not working. And I always tell people, you can't figure this out by, going into a room, putting up Post-its and, doing a whiteboard. You can do that. That's all good. But as long as we're completely inside our head, we're not going to get to the evolution that you talked about, right?
So I think that there are a couple places actually that I'm thinking back to, Nikhil, that really gave me about a year ago. I was in here in Boston at Startup Boston Week. I was in what was called the Expert Exchange. I had 120 conversations over 20 minutes each across 5 days with attendees of Startup Boston Week. These weren't ones where, we're lucky when we're doing remote coaching as well. There are incredible tools that didn't exist 20 years ago that we can leverage, from note-taking tools that can jump on your calls. We're not at a level where coaching requires HIPAA compliance necessarily, but you can do it from a controlled environment so that you don't have to be taking down notes or remember everything that happened. That's a big change. But that room, sitting in a room, having that many conversations, I think I actually fell asleep on the train coming home one night because it was so taxing and exhausting. And it even more acutely, though, showed me I need to work on how I'm architecting my coaching services to be more clear.
Yeah.
Because I was going for everyone. I wanted to be everything to everyone in those conversations. And did it lead to closing a single new client? No, it did not. So that's a hard thing to go through, but I learned something from it not only saying, why didn't this work, but saying, I was in a lineup of, there were 8 other experts there. And again, not to think of imposter syndrome or tie back to that, but it was sitting there going, wow, I don't feel like I have the same expertise that these other coaches or experts are bringing to this exchange. Why don't I feel that way? What's the difference? And it wasn't about that I didn't have the experience. I realized long after, it was about I wasn't packaging that experience
Yeah.
and where I was hoping to go with that experience in a clear enough manner. So something I learned there, and that was great. But the other piece of it, and this ties into the theme of optimism, which of course is part of my first book. I've seen with optimism, especially in the corporate world, but also sometimes with clients that I coach, they roll their eyes sometimes. A lot of people think it means naive positivity, actually, right? But that's totally wrong. Optimism is balanced with realism, and it should be used as a system. I see it as forward motion, and it reframes failure as raw material. Talk about those, I talked about breadcrumbs earlier. That raw material is so important. And those are the things that fuel leaders when everything else is pointing to, I quit, right?
Yeah.
I also believe that so many of us get to that precipice point of success, and we actually turn away from it right before it's happening. So maybe it gets into a little bit of that naive optimism piece of it, but I always feel like that next big turn that this is going to be a success is right around the corner. And I continue marching ahead towards that. But actually, I've seen this pretty frequently. I've coached over 200 Comcast Rise grant founders. That's not a huge amount of a cash flow, but there's so many founders who come from underrepresented places, or they're fighting really, really intense uphill battles.
Yeah.
And the ones who I've taught to lean into optimism as a practice don't just survive, they've built momentum against the odds. And it's kind of industry agnostic. A lot of them are founders that are operating 1 to 5 or 1 to 15 employee businesses. They come from a different world compared to a tech startup leader.
Yeah.
But that is so important in my own learning journey as well, to say, you've got a dog walking business in downtown Center City, Philadelphia. I realized by coaching clients like that, or there's a fantastic female carpenter who does incredible woodworking work in Roanoke, Virginia. Each of these businesses, I could take from my own corporate experience that scale up nature and help them understand that they can become more effective in how they're managing their business. That's always in the back of my mind also. When I coach 7 and 8 figure leaders, it's not a disparate place to come from.
No.
Because even a 1 to 5 person employee business, that founder is thinking about the 3 million things in their head that they need to get done, just like someone who's running a $50 million a year business. It's not that different.
I completely agree with you. And we call it the human condition, right? Because
Right.
ultimately the things we go through, whether it's a 5-person business, you still have mouths to feed, you have responsibilities, if you manage, you have to deal with your lack of confidence, self-worth. There are all these things, irrespective of how big or small the ship you're trying to turn around is.
Right.
So there was something that you've touched on a couple of times, but I wanted to ask you a little more pointedly. Right now, your brand centers on something that is hard to package: energy and optimism. So how do you turn something intangible, or how are you working to turn that into a story that founders would actually buy and pay for, right? Because the people you're dealing with are all about tangible outputs, ROI, right? So how is that working?
I mean, it's been a hard translation to go through, admittedly. But something that I've had people for 15 years tell me that I need to launch a podcast. I finally launched a podcast. I've needed to get my face and my voice out there. That's the best way that I can help architect for people in a very concise manner what energy coaching means and how it can apply to them. So from a packaging standpoint, I think a lot of us have trouble first looking at ourselves when we're on video. I wrote my first book again, was published last year. I also self-recorded the audiobook. So talk about an arduous process to go through of listening to your voice, and it stops seeming as weird. But those things, people for years told me, launch a podcast. You need to do video. I was posting endlessly with simple text on LinkedIn. That's my biggest platform to connect with people. And it wasn't telling the story. It wasn't resonating. I even though would run into people at events and I would say, hey, I'm Adam, I'm an energy coach. And 9 times out of 10 for a while, they would go, oh, so you operate in solar, or is it in oil and gas? Or, is it about sustainable regenerative energy? And I would go, no, that's not what that's not what it is. I'm passionate about that, of course, but that's not what I'm doing here. If I could consult in that, that's a whole different ball of wax to get into. But I needed to build the Adam W.Barney brand up there and associate it with energy. And
Right.
that's where the scale smarter idea came to me. It's super simple. It's more tangible than energy coaching comes off as initially, but it's the entry point into the ecosystem. And then it was about, starting to bring things that I've created to the world. I have an energy boost blueprint that I happily will provide to anyone who's interested, that lays out some of the mindset shifts and the action to take about shifting energy. It's also why I wrote Make Your Own Glass Half Full.
Yeah.
I realized a long time ago, well, even before writing that first book, glass half full, glass half empty is kind of a ubiquitous classification across humans.
Yeah.
My perspective was, screw that, throw those glasses over your shoulders. No one other than yourself is going to pour that glass for you. And that book is about, building the mindset, the habits, and the systems to drive optimism as a strategy that can really be impactful. It's actually funny when you think about solopreneurs or founders and entrepreneurs. In my mind, the difference is that autonomy is in there. That self-determination, that openness to self-determination, and that path is the difference of someone who stays in a corporate job or leaves, tries to build something, and then goes back to the corporate job. Maybe sometimes it's a little bit of crazy. Maybe sometimes it's a little bit of idiocy sometimes, but that crazy is okay to use, right? And that autonomy drives us forward. And I truly feel, I don't only talk about my own journey in the book as well. I distill down a lot of positive psychology that comes from Martin Seligman, the father of positive psychology.
Yeah.
But I also tell stories, incredible stories across thousands of years of human history, where from my view, optimism and autonomy led to transformational change. Think about Viktor Frankl in World War II.
Yeah.
Someone who was in the concentration camps and became one of the world's leading neurologists in that day and age. Think about Oprah Winfrey, even, who grew up and was told that she couldn't be on TV. She built an empire from that. Even looking at folks like Sarah Blakely, building Spanx, like that self-led determination with that optimism of this is going to eventually turn positive for me. That's the difference in the world of the people who truly make an impact, but make an impact that's centered in the middle of who they are in their heart or in their being.
Yeah, no, I love that. And that's a great point too, right? Because it doesn't mean what you're doing is wrong. Sometimes you have to help your audience understand how it impacts them and sort of meet them halfway, right? Which is, again, part of the learning experience, I think. And I think the one commonality we have is people, sometimes when I'm introducing myself in network calls on virtual calls, people have actually told me when I said, hi, I'm a solopreneur, they're like, oh, so you build solar panels? So we have that in common, Adam.
That's where you say, I do that in my spare time, but here's what I actually do.
Absolutely.
And I build solar panels for Lego sets, right? That's the other difference.
Right. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about some of the things that are sort of actionable, right? So you have this concept of a dream week system, if I got that correctly. So can
That's
you
right.
break down what that actually looks like? And if someone listening wanted to try it next week, what's the
Yep.
first thing they should do to set it up?
It is one of the most powerful, simple tools that we can architect out there. You can pull up a Google Sheet right now,
Yeah.
lay out 3 boxes in the AM, 3 boxes in the PM, put Sunday through Saturday as the headers, and in those put 1, 2, or 3 things that in your dream week you would want to get done in each of those buckets, right? It's the lighter version of getting into time blocking,
Yeah.
but it's talking about if you had the perfect week, strip away all of the noise, whether that's family obligations, whether it's the business that you're running right now, strip that all away and really understand what are the core things that are going to move the needle for you. And then that architects into a larger calendar blocking system that we can put into place to make sure that you get those things done. Is it every Monday morning? It's sending, 50 LinkedIn DMs to second connections? Is it following up with his existing clients? And then Monday afternoon, could it even be folding the laundry or picking the kids up early from school,
Right.
right? It
Yeah.
can be, it doesn't have to all be work related, but what are the core things that drive you? And then when you've got that dream week built out, how do you start to tangibly block those into your calendar to make sure that they happen? Because, you know, this gets into really the nature of what I love to get into. Burnout isn't about doing too much. It's about doing too much of the wrong things.
Yeah.
And your calendar ultimately, no matter where you are as a solo entrepreneur or someone who's building a scaling business, your calendar is your real boss. And until you take it back, you're still working for someone else, right? It's not a real person. And luckily, even with the advent of AI tools and technology, every business is run by a human still this day, at least as of today that we're recording this.
Yes.
That calendar can drive you. And if you fix your calendar, that's a big win, but that's what that dream week starts to influence.
Yeah.
Because it's not just about blocking your calendar, it's about strategically using those blocks during the day. I mean, how many of us in our corporate careers have been in back-to-back meetings from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m.? And oh, look, we forgot to eat. I will admit I was guilty of it in my own corporate career where, I would end up sometimes finally sneaking out for lunch at like 3:30 in the afternoon. That doesn't feel good. That also doesn't, if you're a leader in an organization and that's the way you operate, going back to the ripple effect,
Yeah.
when your employees start to see that as the way to operate, that isn't going to bring them to a place where they can work around it or elevate above it. And that's unfortunate, right?
Yeah, no, so I take it you're not advocating having a mattress next to the desk at the office, right? Like
No,
some
not at
people who
all.
shall remain unnamed
Well,
suggested
it's also, it's another interesting thing, right? Along with glass half full, glass empty,
yeah.
one other thing that I love to always remind my coaching clients about is that one of the few other things that level sets every human on this planet, no matter if we're running a $6 billion business or we're trying to start a consulting business or we're running the laundromat around the corner, we all only have 24 hours in the day to get done what we need to get done. And that pulls in the need for restoration is critical. Another nuance that I've kind of come across in the last couple of years, I'm in a lot of startup ecosystems with a lot of founders. It's incredible when you look at some of the incubators that are out there.
Yeah.
And they focus on taking not always recent college or graduate student graduates, but they're people who don't have a lot of other obligations that they need to think about. So when you add into the mix the complexity of, I live in a household with 2 young daughters, 2 dogs, dogs need walks, kids need to go to school day isn't a long day. how do I get done what I need to get done within that 24 hours, but within that sub segment of the 24 hours that I actually have the ability to work? How do I get that done in the complexity of my world? That's something that I think about. So I've actually talked, this is something that's going to come next year. And I won't preview this too heavy because we need to do a little bit more legwork. I'm talking with a couple other really fantastic folks about building a platform that's an accelerator program for people who have what I'll gently call complex living situations, whether it's young kids, families that rely upon them, aging parents, they've entered the sandwich generation. Those kinds of folks can make incredible change in the world. I think, Nikhil, you and I have both seen probably a lot of the research. Some of the most successful businesses are actually built by people who started the business when they were in their late 30s or 40s.
40s, yeah, that's the most
right?
successful founders.
That's when the idea starts to come out there that's really clear of where you go. That's also the most complex probably time for so many of those people in their lives when their time is limited from other things. So it's understanding what are the things that are going to move the needle from a dream week perspective, and then how do I use the time that's available to me in the most effective way possible? It's not about I don't think a lot of people doom scroll on LinkedIn. They doom scroll on other social media platforms, but it's not spending all your time there, right? And in those kinds of places that aren't productive. The other part of it I've realized in my own journey, I think over the first 3 years, I always felt like it was so much easier. I could hand me a product that someone else created. I could go and sell that. It's a hell of a lot harder to go out there and sell yourself, right? I'm not the kind of person who wants to do that. I love to build genuine, authentic relationships. That is a hard thing to get around, to say, oh, I actually can charge what I'm worth. But also I can sell what I'm selling here, and I'm confident in it. And I've gone through a lot of internal work on that end. So if anyone out here is in that process, I can help guide through that as well, because, scaling without that energy operating system, I've realized, is like building skyscrapers on sand. Think about, you're sitting on the beach. It looks fine until the high tide comes up or until the wind blows it over. That's the raw truth that we sit in.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I love what you're building too, because I think there's a real need for that, right? Because otherwise, there are two parts to this, right? I mean, your dream week system I love because it allows you to do the things you need to do without feeling guilty, right? Because otherwise there's this, if I'm not working, if I'm not, moving the business forward, if I'm spending time with the kids or folding laundry, like you said, which are all important activities, then you feel like you're taking away from something. So I love the way you designed that system. So it's not just work, because I think, like you said, just work leads to burnout, and also lack of fulfillment. And then the other thing is, I'd love to keep talking to you about that, but and stay in touch as you build launch this next year, because I really think there is a need for that, for people to not be shut out just because of complex family situations, right? Founders shouldn't only be open to people who have less responsibility and the ability to focus 24/7 on their business, because I don't think all the priorities work in the right way there. So I love that.
Well, and it gets into this idea of grace also, right? And it's self-grace, it's grace of others, and it's the grace of the world around us. But that's incredible.
Yeah, the other thing I want to talk about is, you mentioned something to me which I think is really important and would be great for this audience to hear, is you said recording small wins is critical, right? So talk a little bit to us about what that looks like. Do you have a ritual? Is there a notebook, voice memos? And how could the solopreneurs listening feel that for themselves?
Number one, that is the game changer no matter where you come from, though. Recording small wins is so critically important. It's what's right for you for where to record them. It could be voice notes. I've actually recommended, it can be a lot simpler. Go to your local, CVS, Staples, pharmacy, wherever it is. Go buy a small little 99-cent notebook that's about this big, that fits in your back pocket, and just carry it around with you. And it doesn't need to be complex. We as humans, don't do a good job at doing that, which is why some sort of technology, whether it's a small notebook or voice notes, you need to bring it, because you talked about the allure of darkness at the beginning, which is my favorite chapter in the first book. That allure of darkness is incredibly enticing
Yeah.
and alluring. When you start to record the small wins, that's your fuel to not fall back into that allure of darkness. That's the battery that you can pull out and look at, hey, it also doesn't have to be big. It's big things.
Mm-hmm.
It can be, I fixed XYZ misspelling on my website, or maybe I didn't close a lead this week, but I got incredibly important feedback from one person on my board of advisors about how I can repivot my energy. Or, I showed up on time to every meeting I had on my calendar this week, and I didn't go over the meetings this week.
Yeah.
Doesn't have to be super complex, but it should be a consistent practice to keep front and center, because then you realize, and again, one of the nuances with the Dream Week that I would dig back into actually is, we shouldn't be focused on doing 15 things every day.
Yeah.
When you've recorded those small wins and you get the one thing, the two things, the three things you need to get done, that's great. Pat yourself on the back, mentally pack it away, and then it's a tool to not get sucked into that allure of darkness of, I didn't get anything done today.
Yeah.
I didn't get anything done this week, and ultimately, if you have something on that to-do list that was supposed to get done today and you didn't get it done today, give yourself a little bit of grace. Say that's okay. If it turns into 2 days, 3 days of not getting it done, maybe it's not a priority on your list, or maybe it's something that should get reprioritized, and that's okay.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think, like you said, that is the secret sauce for solopreneurs, right? We're on this journey.
Right.
And I have a wins folder, which I keep over the years, but those are big things, right? And I'm going to steal this completely, because the little things, I think, is what give you the day-to-day fuel and the resilience that you need on this lonely journey, right?
Exactly.
So I'm going to put you a little bit on the spot. You build these Odyssey plans, right? So let me ask you, if we were to meet again 3 years from now, what would you want to have achieved?
Oh gosh, that I finally have built the sustainable business. That's one thing, right? That I'm charging what I deserve to charge, that I'm showing up on those stages, but it also showcases I'm getting to spend time with my family and not fall into the trap that I help coach others out of working on the business 24 hours on, a day. The other piece of it is, maybe it's not as hard to go out there and say, I'm Adam W.Barney, an energy coach, right? That becomes a little bit easier to explain. I'm not going to say I'm going to be living on a beach in Bali. That would be fantastic to get to go visit there a little bit more often, or other exotic places around the world. But I'm happy with where I am. And I don't have to do as much. This is going to sound not lazy, I hope, but I don't have to do as much work or put as much thought behind the business.
Yeah. No.
It's also about getting that support. Solopreneurs, we try to get everything done ourselves. I think I do that at a different level because I come from a marketing world. I feel like I can take every shiny object tool and I can manage myself. And then that leaves me, am I able to manage anything? No. So I've actually built into my own personal practice, every 3 months, I go and do an evaluation of things that I'm going to stop doing or say no to that aren't moving progress forward. So that's critical for me to do. I need to continue to do that, and it's all about just having fun. It's still feeling satisfied, feeling energized, feeling ready to go. And ultimately, I know that that's delivered by helping more people in the world with everything from my coaching standpoint that I hope to help them with. That's where I get that validation. And if I'm only, fledgling with the business, it hasn't been there, but that's a personal mission to be on as well.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I hope you will invite me to join you for a drink when you're in Bali. If you could offer one piece of advice to somebody wanting to start their solopreneur journey, what would you tell them?
If listeners today take one thing away from our conversation, energy is equity.
Yeah.
Optimism then is strategy, but also we didn't get to talk about this too much. Networks are multipliers.
Yeah. That great advice. And I just remembered what I was going to say. I love your 3-month audit because I think most people don't realize the key is subtraction, not addition.
Yeah.
We keep adding more and more things. And like you said, it just weighs us down. It gets us
Right.
unfocused and burns us out. So I love that,
Right.
what you said earlier. So is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners that we haven't covered, Adam?
We've covered a lot today.
We have.
If anyone wants to go deeper, you can head to adamwbarney.com to schedule a 20-minute exploration call. I'd love to see if the Energy OS install is right for you or your team. Folks can grab a copy of my book, Make Your Own Glass Half Full. If you want to listen to my voice for 2 hours, grab the audiobook version, but it's the playbook for optimism and autonomy. I'd also love, folks check out my podcast, Is Anything Real in Paid Advertising? That goes back to my corporate background to cut through the BS in marketing and growth. And then, connect with me on LinkedIn. My network is yours. If you search Adam W.Barney, get that W in there, you'll find me.
We will. We will. And we will add all the links you just mentioned in the resources so people will be able to find you pretty easily. And we will make sure the W is in there. So that brings, and I look forward to being on your podcast. So let people know that's going to happen too. So now that brings us to our rapid fire round. So I'm just going to throw 5 questions at you and tell us what comes to mind.
Yep.
So one app you delete from every solopreneur's phone.
LinkedIn.
Oh, okay. Interesting. If you could uninvent one, I don't know if that's a word, but let's go with it. One piece of business advice, what would it be?
Oh gosh, that everything happens immediately when you hit the go button.
Good one. If your energy coaching had a warning label, what would it say?
Don't have too much fun.
I love that.
And that's because levity always matters in my book also. When I need a reset, it's throwing on a band like the Cardigans, somebody who's criminally underrated, but that's what I bring. It's not just about talking about what the business side of it is, it's the personal side, and it's the perspective that let's have fun while we're doing this. It shouldn't be a slog, it's not a drag. It's not sitting with your therapist, luckily, or your business partner or your venture investors. It should be fun. We should have some fun with this, and the laughter emanates out and it ripples outward as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And also, if it's not, then you need to reconsider what you're doing. If it's always a slog. What's the smallest win you've celebrated in the biggest way?
Oh boy. Smallest win is I got at least one comment on a LinkedIn post.
That's awesome. If your business had a mascot, what would it be?
Oh, Sparky. Sparky is the name of it. I've thought about this actually. I haven't brought this to the forefront. Sparky would be that animated plug. Luckily I've got the emoji that I can rely upon. But I would love Sparky the Plug, not the dog, Sparky the Plug to be that mascot.
I can tell you it's on brand. I love it. And, and thanks. So Adam, that brings us to the end of our show. Thank you so much and I feel more energized and more optimistic. So I appreciate you sharing all the wisdom and tips that you did today.
Thank you, Nikhil. Thank you for this space. And to everyone listening, protect your energy, scale smarter, and keep your journey unfiltered.
Amen to that. What I love about Adam's story is how it reminds us that building a solo business is rarely a straight line. You're going to try things that flop, you'll undercharge, overwork, or wrestle with imposter syndrome. That's not failure, that's raw material. The real skill is turning those breadcrumbs into forward momentum. For me, the biggest takeaway is the central role of energy. Solopreneurs, you need to think of energy as the real equity in your business. If you don't design your days around restoring and protecting it, the bill eventually comes due through burnout, poor decisions, or missed opportunities. That's why I love tools like Adam's Dream Week. It's not about cramming more into your calendar. It's about structuring your time so the right things get done and the wrong things don't drain you. Second, Adam's story reinforces something I see with so many of my clients. The evolution of your positioning is rarely a straight line. When he started as a growth coach and felt uncomfortable with that label, it wasn't because he was doing anything wrong. He just hadn't found the language that truly captured his unique value yet. That side comment from a fellow coach about energy being his lightning bolt, that's exactly why I always say you can't write the label from inside the bottle. Third, the Dream Week system Adam shared is brilliant because it forces you to think beyond just work tasks. When you're designing your ideal week and including everything, the client calls, the business development, but also the laundry and family time, you're actually designing a sustainable business model, not just a to-do list. That's the difference between building something that scales and building something that burns you out. And I love the practice of recording small wins. It's not just feel good fluff, it's brand equity. Every small win you document becomes proof of your capability, evidence of your progress, and fuel for those inevitable dark moments when imposter syndrome kicks in. The success of your solo business isn't just about how many clients you've served, it's the accumulation of what you've actually done, even the small stuff. So here's your action step for the week. Choose one thing that fuels you, whether it's blocking white space in your calendar, documenting small wins, or finally saying no to something that drains you. That's not indulgence, that's brand strategy. Because in the end, your energy isn't just fuel for your business, it's the foundation it's built on. Thanks for listening to Unfiltered Solopreneur. If today's episode gave you clarity or confidence, don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe to the show, leave a review, and share it with another solopreneur who needs this message. That's how we grow this movement. One small share, one solo business at a time. Until next time, keep breaking free from the corporate grind. And remember, your story is your most powerful asset. Live solo or die corporate.